Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in for this afternoon's presentation, the Paterson Museum's Glass Plate Negative Collection, an update and some success stories. I'm Heather Garside. I'm the curator here at the Paterson Museum, and I'm going to be talking to you about this really exciting collection that we have. This presentation is going to build on a presentation that I gave in 2022 about the museum's collection. And if you'd like to see that program, I'm going to provide a link after the presentation. I'll provide a link to the YouTube channel where you can watch that first video as well. I'll put that in the chat. This presentation is also being recorded, as I mentioned earlier, and will be placed on the YouTube channel probably in the next week or so. We will send out a link to all attendees to let them know that it's become available. So you'll be able to either share that with other people you know missed out or review it again on your own for another viewing. When you are reviewing that, and as I go through the presentation today, you will notice that in most of the slides with a historic picture, there's going to be a number in one of the corners, which usually starts with an N, 2021. That full number is the identification number for the specific photo that you're seeing. So if there's a particular photo that you want to talk to us more about, please, if you reference that number, it makes it a lot easier for us to know which one you're talking about. Now, I'm going to answer questions at the end of my presentation, but do please feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat as we go along so that you don't forget them. And as I said, when I finish with my presentation, I'll be very happy to review them over with all of us. So here we go. Before I dive into showing you photographs, I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce you to the project as a whole. This might be a little repetitive for those of you who remember or have recently rewatched my earlier presentation. I apologize for that. In 2021, the Paterson Museum, in partnership with the Paterson Museum Foundation, decided that we needed to focus our attention on our glass plate negative collection. The museum holds approximately 250,000 photographs and negatives, of which the glass plates comprise about 8,000. The foundation sought and received funding from the Fred J. Brotherton Charitable Foundation and the Passaic County Cultural and Heritage Council, with funds granted by the New Jersey Historical Commission, to begin professionally scanning the negatives and rehousing them in more archivally appropriate materials. But what is a glass plate negative? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a photographic negative with the emulsion adhered to a thin piece of clear glass. The first glass plate negatives, which were known as wet plate negatives, were developed in 1851. The use of glass allowed for a sharper image with a lot more detail. However, the wet medium meant that the process allowed for a very short time frame between taking the photo and when it needed to be developed, and that limited its use. In 1873, silver gelatin-coated dry plates were invented. This medium had many of the same features as wet glass plates, including the sharper image quality, but being dry allowed it to be more versatile. Photographers no longer needed to take photos close to their studios. They were free to travel and capture the outside world. And the dry plates were commonly used from the 1880s through the 1920s. The museum's collection contains all dry plate negatives. Now, I've included this to give you an idea of the style of camera being used to take glass plates. This is a camera from the Smithsonian's collection. It's an American optical company camera made in New York around 1884. And this one is relatively small, and this camera would have produced 4x5 negatives. Negatives were produced in all different sizes, and that was all. The size of the negative was dependent on the size of the camera that took it. In our collection, most sizes are represented, but the vast majority of our negatives are 8x10 or 8.5 by 6.5. As the negatives we're talking about are made out of glass, I probably don't have to tell you that they are a more fragile photographic medium. Glass plate negatives are very susceptible to cracks, and as you can see from this scan, the corners are particularly easily damaged. The emulsion can also sometimes separate from the glass, and this can sometimes create large holes or tears in the image. This is what the emulsion separation and loss can look like when you look at the positive of that negative image. So here we see the emulsion has started cracking along the top edge. And we also see I've circled some areas of total loss, which show up on the scan as bright white. However, with digital enhancement, it is possible to edit out some of those smaller areas of damage and to help the images get back closer to their original condition. Now, this original scan that you see on the left had faded very badly, but when we darkened it, the image allowed us again to see the faces in the picture. When we started this project, most of our glass plates were stored on shelves like you see here on the left. With some of the funds of the grant we received, we purchased hard plastic archival boxes, and we put each negative in its own sleeve and buffered those sleeves with both tissue paper and archival cardboard to prevent movement inside the boxes and protect each negative from each other. And I'm happy to report that as of August 2023, the glass plate negatives are all safely scanned and stored in their new boxes. So that would seem to be the end of the project, right? We're all complete, we've scanned everything, but that's really actually only just the beginning. In order for these photographs to be of any use to anyone, we need to provide descriptions and, wherever possible, identification of the individuals or dates of what's happening. And as the glass plate negatives are negatives, it makes it hard for them to have information added to them directly. With a print, people often turn them over on the back and scribble some identifying information. But with negatives, that's much harder to do. So most of the negatives have nothing written on them whatsoever. So how do you go about identifying 8,000 images dating from the 1880s to the 1930s? One of the strategies that we developed very early on was crowdsourcing. We recognized that this was a Herculean undertaking that was far more than our staff alone could accomplish. And so with our partner in the project, the Paterson Museum Foundation, we began to share photographs regularly on their social media accounts. We dubbed these glass plate negative reveal posts, and they gave us a chance to share these images with the public and let the public know about the project and invite them to help us out. In some cases, local knowledge was all it took, as was the case with the image in the bottom right corner, which I'm going to show to you here. It is again a little bit bigger. Several Patersonians reacted pretty quickly and informed us that this group is standing in front of Eastside High School. And they figured that out just based on the architectural features that they recognized with the building. In other cases, people really decided to get out their magnifying glasses and do some sleuthing for us, which is exactly what we were hoping for. We collect all the comments that are left for us on Facebook, and we review them as we look at each photograph more closely, and we sort of compare people's thoughts. Sometimes the photos are really easy for us to identify even ourselves. This group of houses is actually still standing on East Main Street. And it looks enough like the original that we were pretty much able to identify it right away. Another easy photograph for us, this image was taken of the fire damage of the city following the Great Fire of 1902. We happen to have a whole series of images showing that fire damage. This one is just outside of City Hall. But even with these images, more time should be dedicated to determining the exact location that each one was shot and other important details. For example, this image that you see on your screen now was lumped in with a bunch of the photos of the damage of 1902. But when you look more closely, it seems to us this may not be a photograph from that fire, but from an isolated fire incident at another time. The surrounding buildings don't show the level of devastation that we have come to expect from images of the Great Fire, which makes us think that it was just this particular building and not the Great Fire. Sometimes going through the collection, we recognize a person, the staff. We have, for example, 3 or 4 images of Eleanor Egg, and here she is. She was a local track and field star, and we recognized her, especially with the pictures of her in action running, made it very easy for us to know that that was who those photographs were of. But despite these few examples of the easy pictures, the vast majority of the photos are going to prove to be very difficult. We realize that even after extensive research, some of these photographs may never be identified, and that's particularly true of the studio portraits. And amongst the studio portraits, particularly true of the very large number of child portraits we have. Unless someone recognizes a family member or recognizes a specific photo from a family photo that they have a physical print of, it is very unlikely that we will ever know the names of a lot of the people in this collection. Another challenge we face as we go through the collection is that the collection was not organized or as organized as we thought it was when we started scanning. So when we started scanning, we realized that many photos that had been taken as a series had been broken up over time with how they were stored, and they've been separated. Sometimes now that we look through the scans, those photos have only been separated with a few photos in between them, but other times they've been separated by up to 50 to 100 negatives. And that makes deciding and figuring out what an event particularly or people are very difficult, because we're not necessarily realizing that we have more than one view of something or of a person. But through the act of looking through the collection more regularly, we are sometimes finding that these photos jump out to us. In this case, this photo, particularly the little girl's bow, really popped out to me, and I recognized that it was the same little girl. And with a stroke of luck, when I looked more closely at the photos, I noticed, and you'll see with the picture that is on the right, there is a little bit written onto the top of it. So that image says Dorothea, July 7th, 1907. So now we know that these are both Dorothea from 1907. I actually, after looking at her a little bit and looking through more photos, realized that I was seeing someone popping up repeatedly with a very similar face, but at different ages. And when I compared all those images together, I decided it was the same little girl over time, which then made me start to wonder, what children would a photographer be photographing regularly over a long period of time? And I researched Charles Heinrichs, who's one of the photographers that we attribute to this collection. I found his obituary, and he actually had a daughter named Dorothy, or possibly Dorothea. The newspaper may have gotten that wrong. So I now believe that these photographs are probably Dorothy or Dorothea Heinrichs. And it's interesting, in my research, I actually found that she became a photographer herself, which was kind of a neat thing to have learned about this little girl as she grew up. Even when they are present, some of the labels still require a little bit more detective work. This group is labeled HBA Reunion, 1910 to 1918, September 8th, 1918. Now, we believe the HBA stands for the Hebrew Boys Association, and we have to do a little bit of further research to confirm that. And once we do, there is a small chance that we'll be able to name the men in this image. And the fact that several of them are in uniforms allows us that there may be another avenue to research in order to match their faces with maybe images of known World War I veterans. Even without a caption, some of the photographs have a lot of information to share. Within the glass plate negatives, there's also a large group of images of vehicles produced or painted by the Paterson Vehicle Company. Many of these images provide a very good view of the Paterson Vehicle Company building. And the details on the vehicles themselves can also tell us a lot about who the vehicle company's customers were. This truck, which says U Bada and Company, importers of wines and brandies, located at 290 Straight Street in Paterson, New Jersey. Now, we haven't actually done this yet with this image, but that information would be easy to trace either in city directories or in atlases, and we should be able to learn more about that company, such as how long it was in business in Paterson, some of the people associated with it, and the management of it, and also when it opened. As I've been mentioning over and over, many of the images in a series are not necessarily close together. We have many pictures that are taken of various building projects in progress. And some of the sites have been visited throughout the building process and have various sort of stages of building. One of the buildings that's very well documented within the collection is the Masonic Temple on Broadway, which was built between 1922 and 1923. This image is obviously showing the building pretty much complete from what we can tell. Here's an image much earlier in the process, and you'll notice that I've circled and highlighted a particular house in the background. That building actually provided a clue to a different photo, and I'm going to show you that one next. As you can see clearly in this photo, this is some kind of a construction site really early on. We don't have a lot to go on other than the date, September 14th, 1922. But it was when I noticed that building, and then I'm going to quickly go back to the previous, and you see there's the building again, that I realized that this must be a very early phase of the building of the Masonic Temple. Now, with the Masonic Temple, we also have images of the cornerstone laying event. And here we see Nathan Barner, twice mayor of Paterson and very active in the Paterson community. front and center. Here is a wider view of the ceremony and the participants. And we probably will be able to find in the newspaper at least a little bit more information about that ceremony, maybe some of the speakers as well. While we're on the topic of ceremonies and groups of photographs that are no longer together, I'm personally very proud to have been able to figure out this next series of photos I'm going to tell you about. We have a whole series of images of speakers on this dais with this flag in the center, which we recognize as the flag of Israel, but at the time would have represented the Zionist movement. Now, looking through these pictures, that central flag keeps popping out, making it easy to identify that all of these pictures are definitely the same event, but we have no clue as to what that event might be. And other than that, no way to know, who's speaking or any of the other details about this. Then I saw this photo in the series, and there are two important clues here that kind of helped me along. One, we noticed Nathan Barnard here again, front and center. And second, if you look at the date of the cornerstone, it says 1926. So I took that information back to newspapers.com, and never in a million years did I expect to get this lucky, but there were several articles covering this event, one of which included the headshots of every single speaker for the program for that day. So I am now able to take this article, and I was able to go back and figure out who was the speaker being photographed at the dais at each one of the photos that we have. Now, that whole series of photos, it turns out, are from the cornerstone laying of the Daughters of Miriam home in Clifton, New Jersey. These two images just captured my attention, and I really liked them. I thought that with a name written on them, the Aiken Trio Novelty Act, I might be able to quickly find out something about them. I was relatively quickly able to find an ad for the Majestic Theater in Paterson. This is from April 14th, 1917, which lists the Aiken Trio as a part of Keith Biggs' vaudeville show here in Paterson. They seem to have been touring northern New Jersey at that time, for here in the Hudson Observer of Hoboken on April 28th, 1917, we have another mention of the Aiken Trio. So I can pretty confidently say, I think, that photograph was taken in 1917 during their tour. However, their fate before and after is largely unknown to me, at least at the moment. I did track down Keith Biggs' archive. His personal papers are held at the University of Iowa libraries, but when I reached out to them, the Aiken Trio is not included in those papers. So that was sort of a dead end for me. On a similar vein, we have several images from the Walter K. Sibley Women's Swimming and Diving Champions. This includes approximately 30 images of divers themselves. Many of these images show the divers in various poses, which, again, these were not all together. And can I say we were very confused as to what these women were doing when we were just finding one of these kind of out of sequence. Other images in this series show the women with various trophies and medals. I was able to track down an article about Sibley's show in 1912. Walter K. Sibley's Diving Girls, occupying an enclosure of 100 by 140 feet and with a seating capacity of 1,000 persons, Walter K. Sibley's Diving Girls is one of the largest entertainments on the lot. 6 charming young women, each of whom is a champion swimmer and diver, performs an amazing program of fancy evolutions in the large tank which occupies the center of the enclosure. As ballyhoo, Mr. Sibley has just purchased and imported Ruth organ at the cost of $8,000 from Burney of New York. This is the second largest mechanical organ in the country. Now, that article from 1912 was not from a Paterson paper, but at least we now document that this show existed in 1912. And I did find several other articles talking about other shows and events that Sibley was involved in, which included a freak show that got a lot of publicity. However, I was not able to find any record yet of Sibley in northern New Jersey with the diving show that would have sort of helped me identify when our photos were taken. And none of the articles that even mention the diving show name the divers, so their individual identities may never be known to us. While the photographers for all of the photos in our glass plate negative collection were based in Paterson, that doesn't mean that the photos that we have are exclusively Paterson. And with the help of Pete Longden, who's on this call today, we have identified that a whole series of images are from the community of Awasting in Greenwood Lake. Pete has not only helped us directly, but he's also connected with others in the community to try and identify some of these locations. This image has been identified as the boathouse at Awasting, which is located at 150 Long Pond Road. In many cases, the houses photographed still exist, and Pete has kindly provided us with images of the houses today and their current addresses. So this is 11 Lake Avenue, and this is 153 Long Pond Road. We will now be able to include these modern images and the addresses into our description with these photos, and that makes it even more valuable to researchers. And we really thank Pete for all of his time and effort he's taken with this project. Now, Pete is not the only person who has come forward and helped us with this group of images. In the glass plates, we have a variety of sports photographs. Now, most of those photographs are team shots, like sort of group shots at a studio often. But we do have about 60 action photos taken of live baseball games, and this is one of them. We shared a few on social media last fall, and the result was really amazing. Here's another one of those images. Now, they're all really, I think, amazing action shot photos. We were contacted by a researcher named John Zinn, who's also on this call, I think, who told us the games were played at the Dougherty Oval. He asked if he could help us to identify the teams and maybe the games that were being played. He consulted with a few other researchers, and when they were all done, they were able to tell us what teams and the dates of the games. And in some cases, they suggested that with a little more time, they might even be able to identify some of the specific players. In the case of one team, they were able to pinpoint the team and the year just solely based on what socks they were wearing, which is far beyond any of the expertise that we would have had available to us here at the museum. Some of the photos were of an African-American team, and the team had a very distinct checkerboard uniform that you see here in this picture. John consulted with a fellow historic baseball researcher, Gary Ashwell, and they were able to determine that this team was the Royal Giants of Brooklyn. And in most cases, they were able to share newspaper articles about which games we had photographs of, which is great to also have on our records. So as you can imagine, that's all far beyond what we had hoped for, but there's actually still more. Besides the game photographs, we have a whole series of individual portraits on the field at the Dougherty Oval of players from both teams of a particular matchup. And for help on those photos, Jack DeVries helped us out, and he has done extensive research on the Dougherty Silk Socks and has actually written a book, and I will share links to his book and the other two gentlemen's blogs in a minute. And Jack not only helped us to identify the Silk Sox players with both first and last names, he also provided us with mini bios on the players, which we'll be able to add to our database and also helps us out greatly with being able to help researchers and use this collection more extensively. As a result of all this teamwork and collaboration, our photos have now been shared on not one but two historic baseball blogs. This first is a view of Gary Ashwell's blog, Agate Type, Reconstructing Negro League and Latin American Baseball History. And in his article, Checkerboard Plaid, which is all about the Royal Giants team from Brooklyn, he used photos of our glass plate negatives. And this is the second blog, A Manly Pastime, a baseball history blog by John Zinn. And in his article, Sunday at the Oval with Ray and Harry, he shares many of the museum's photos. And as I said, I will share links to those with you in a moment. Now, I just wanted to leave you with this final amazing snapshot of sort of a moment of life in August of 1906, which is all we know about this photo right now. Maybe one day we will know what is happening in the image as well. I hope everyone has enjoyed this presentation and that you learned a few things. Also, if anyone watching this presentation feels like you'd like to become a detective and help us to identify the photos, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I want to say one more time that we are so grateful to everyone who's been helping us with our research to the collection so far. I mentioned some people today, but there are a lot of others out there. David Wilson's been helping us extensively with the Paterson photos. He's been going through them very diligently and identifying what he's able to. And you actually, to be able to help us with this collection, you can do this all remotely. So if you're interested in volunteering and working with the collection, but you're not so sure you'd be available to come into the museum or work during the business day, we can help get you set up so that you can look at these pictures remotely. and work with us that way. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you have a subscription to newspapers.com, that'll make it even more fun and interesting. So with that, I'm going to end my screen share, and I'm going to share those links in the chat really quick, and then please feel free to hit me up with some questions. Yes, so Lewis has pointed out that the Jewish Historical Society in Fair Lawn might be able to help with the HBA. We actually did initially reach out to them, and we are working with them on that. So that is one of the avenues that we're working on exploring. Christina said she really enjoyed this session. Thank you very much. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in case anyone tuned in after we got started, the presentation was recorded and it will be put on the museum's YouTube channel. So we will let everybody know when that is available. And if you want to share this program with others or take another look at it yourself, you'll be able to do that. Pete asks if the photos are available online. They are not yet available online, and that is part of why we are doing this research. We hope that our end goal for this project is that they will be available online through the digital highway of the New Jersey Digital Highway, which is through Rutgers. And then they would be completely searchable. However, it's not really useful for us to put them up in the state that they are now, where we don't know much about them. So we're hoping to research them more. And once we get to a certain point with our research that we feel that we're not just posting sort of unknown photo of unknown person in unknown place, then we will try and make some of them available. But it's a very long process with a lot of data entry and things like that involved in actually getting them on the highway. So we're kind of a few years away from that yet. Lewis indicated that the Daughters of Miriam nursing home is still around, but in a different location, which is true. And I actually went on their website and they have one of the photos that we have a negative of in our collection right on their website. So Gary asks about the source of our storage boxes for the glass plates. We got those through Gaylord Archival. And one of the reasons that we had been storing our glass plate negatives as we were, which was these metal Princeton rule files that I showed you earlier, is because one of the problems was that an archival cardboard box, the negatives being glass, were far too heavy to go in a box in any volume. And then if you didn't put enough in, there was a lot of wiggle room and that they could get damaged by just moving around in their box. So we were sort of worried about that. And I did a little digging, and that was when I found these plastic boxes, which work much better. They're much more durable and I think we get about 50 negatives in a box. So especially if they're 8 by 10, if they're littler than that, we get double that. So. All right, well, it doesn't look like there are any other questions coming up. Oh, wait, there are. Hang on. And so Elaine is saying thank you, and she said my father was born in Paterson in 1908. However, he's not in any of the pictures. Thank you very much for the presentation. So as I said, if anybody wants to review any of the photos, they're going to be available on our website. And please just reach out to us if you're interested in the project. Hopefully we'll have more presentations like this sharing our successes as we move along. And hopefully there will be a lot more successes to go. It's just a very slow and long process for us. But in some cases, as I shared with you today, can be very, very gratifying. So with that, thank you very much for tuning in, and happy World Photography Day. And from the Paterson Museum, thank you and good afternoon.